things strange and spooky. This is episode 32, and I'm joined by, we're going to talk about something that we've talked a lot about off the air, but we haven't really mentioned on air. And that is the podcast Sasquatch Chronicles, hosted by Wes Germer. And there's a lot of controversy surrounding that show, and it keeps popping up. And Scott, I think you kind of found this like a couple of weeks ago. I think it was back when I was sick.
Yeah, it was something that had been re-aired. It was something that I hadn't seen when apparently I'd found out that it that was all posted originally when all this came out, the apparent discretion of the show, 2015, 16, I believe it was. But it was, somebody did a lot of research to go to put up the charts that they have to show, what allegedly what happened and what went down and everything. But I was, I was in on the ground floor when before it was Sasquatch Chronicles, it was Bigfoot Hotspot Radio that Wes had started. So, and it was he got it to the point where it was a really good show. And then after this, whatever this happened here, whatever, it's kind of it soured me a little bit. But you can go ahead and tell what happened, and I'll just say how my feelings went after that.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, Sasquatch Chronicles is a very popular podcast about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, hosted by Wes Germer. And every week he has guests on who tell their Bigfoot stories. And it's been around for years now, and he's very well known now. He's at all the conferences, he's got tons of listeners. And I guess he's originally claimed that he started his podcast due to an experience he and his brother Woody had out in Washington State. And I guess a couple of years into his podcast, it started coming out that maybe his story wasn't completely true. There were some inconsistencies. And I know Will Jevning, who, Scott, he was on the show in the early days, and I remember him being on, and he was always a great sort of co-host as well. And then he kind of disappeared, and then Woody disappeared, and Shannon LeGros, who now hosts Into the Fray podcast, she was on the show in the early days, and she kind of departed. And these days, it's really just Wes. And he doesn't even really interview his guests per se anymore. I mean, he asks a few questions, but the majority of the show is really just the guests talking. And
Right.
full disclosure, I still listen to the show. I enjoy the show. I enjoy just the guest stories, the listener stories that they call in and tell their stories. And he does usually ask usually the same questions towards the end of the interview, which is fine. And we're not here tonight to judge Wes or to slam him or anything, but there are